Blackbeard the pirate, born Edward Teach, is one of the most infamous and feared pirates in history. A name that strikes fear and fascination into the hearts of many even today. His life, shrouded in myth and mystery, has become a symbol of piracy in the golden age of piracy during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. But who was the man behind the legend, and how did he transform from a skilled sailor into the notorious pirate that would terrorize the Caribbean and the American colonies? Born around 1680, Edward Teach was likely raised in the bustling port city of Bristol, England, a hub for maritime trade and seafaring adventures. It is believed that Teach, like many young men of his time, was drawn to the sea early in life, starting out as a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession. Privateers were essentially legal pirates, sanctioned by governments to attack enemy ships. This experience would have given Teach valuable skills in naval warfare, tactics, and leadership, which would later serve him well in his pirate career. By the time the war ended in 1713, however, many privateers found themselves out of work, as the peace left no room for their once legal activities. For some, the transition to piracy was an easy one, as the skills and lifestyle were not too different. Edward Teach was one such individual who embraced piracy with fervor, joining forces with the pirate captain Benjamin Hornigold in the Caribbean. Under Hornigold's mentorship, Teach quickly proved himself as a capable and ruthless pirate, and by 1716 he had earned his own command. It was during this time that Teach adopted the moniker Blackbeard, a name that would become legendary. His imposing figure, standing over 6 feet tall with a thick, jet-black beard, made him a terrifying sight to behold. Teach understood the power of image and psychological warfare. He would braid his beard and tie it with ribbons, sometimes even lighting slow-burning fuses under his hat to create the illusion of smoke and fire, making him look like a demon emerging from the depths. This fearsome appearance, combined with his tactical brilliance, allowed Blackbeard to capture ships with minimal resistance, as many captains and crews would surrender without a fight. In 1717, Blackbeard's reputation reached new heights when he captured the French slave ship La Concorde. After refitting and arming it with 40 guns, he renamed the vessel Queen Anne's Revenge, turning it into one of the most formidable pirate ships of the time. With this ship, Blackbeard terrorized the American colonies and the Caribbean, capturing dozens of ships and amassing a considerable fortune. However, Blackbeard was not solely motivated by greed. He was also a master of intimidation and psychological manipulation. His strategy was often to frighten his enemies into surrender rather than engage in bloody combat. This tactic not only reduced the risk to his crew, but also reinforced his fearsome reputation. The legend of Blackbeard grew, and stories of his cruelty and ruthlessness spread like wildfire, though many of these tales were exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Despite his fearsome reputation, Blackbeard's actual violence towards his captives was often more restrained than the stories suggested. In fact, many historical accounts suggest that he preferred to take ships and their goods without unnecessary bloodshed. His crew respected and feared him, not only for his prowess in battle, but also for his cunning and charisma. Blackbeard's leadership style was democratic, as was common among pirate crews, with major decisions being voted on by the men. However, when it came to strategy in battle, his word was law, and his men trusted him to lead them to victory. One of the most infamous events in Blackbeard's career occurred in May 1718, when he blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, effectively shutting down all maritime traffic for nearly a week. Blackbeard and his crew captured several ships, including a vessel carrying prominent citizens of the colony. Rather than ransom them for money, Blackbeard demanded a chest of medicine, which the colony was forced to deliver. This blockade demonstrated his ability to cripple even well-established colonies and showed that Blackbeard was a pirate with more complex motivations than simple greed. However, Blackbeard's reign of terror was not to last forever. In June 1718, he accepted a pardon from the governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden, in exchange for a brief retirement from piracy. For a time, it seemed that Edward Teach had left his pirate life behind. However, it wasn't long before he returned to his old ways, operating out of Ocracoke Island and continuing to plunder ships along the American coast. This return to piracy would be his undoing. His activities had drawn the ire of the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, who saw Blackbeard as a threat to the colony's stability and economy. In November 1718, Spotswood dispatched a small fleet under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt down and eliminate the pirate once and for all. What followed was one of the most legendary naval battles in pirate history. Blackbeard, aboard the Adventure, was outgunned and outnumbered, but he fought with ferocity. Maynard's ship was severely damaged, and it appeared that Blackbeard might escape once again. However, Maynard had concealed many of his men below deck, and when Blackbeard and his crew boarded Maynard's ship, they were ambushed. In the brutal hand-to-hand combat that followed, Blackbeard was shot multiple times and slashed with swords, yet he continued to fight until he was finally brought down. His death marked the end of an era, and his severed head was displayed as a warning to other pirates. The death of Blackbeard did little to diminish his legend. In fact, it only served to fuel the myths surrounding his life and career. Over the centuries, countless stories, books, and films have portrayed him as the quintessential pirate, a larger-than-life figure who embodied the spirit of rebellion and adventure. But who was the real Edward Teach, and how much of the legend is rooted in fact? The truth about Blackbeard's life is difficult to separate from the myths. Much of what we know about him comes from the accounts of his enemies, who had every reason to portray him in the worst possible light. While he was undoubtedly a ruthless and skilled pirate, there is little evidence to suggest that he was the sadistic monster that some stories claim. In fact, his ability to inspire loyalty in his men and his preference for psychological warfare over outright violence suggest a more complex figure. Blackbeard's legacy is one of both terror and fascination. He was a man who understood the power of image and used it to his advantage, becoming a symbol of piracy that endures to this day. His story, a mix of fact and fiction, has captivated generations, and his name remains synonymous with the golden age of piracy. As we delve deeper into the life and legend of Blackbeard, we will explore the complexities of his character, his motivations, and the impact he had on the world around him. From his early days as a privateer to his final battle off the coast of North Carolina, the story of Edward Teach is one of intrigue, danger, and above all, mystery. Blackbeard's life, while terrifying to his victims, is equally a tale of survival, adaptation, and cunning, in a time when piracy was more than just a way to acquire wealth. It was often the only way out for disenfranchised sailors and former privateers. As the golden age of piracy reached its peak, the lines between lawful seafaring and criminal enterprise blurred, creating a complex world in which individuals like Edward Teach could thrive. Teach's early years remain mysterious, but historians agree that his time as a privateer during the War of the Spanish Succession played a crucial role in shaping his later exploits. It was during this war, which lasted from 1701 to 1714, that young Teach gained first-hand experience in naval combat and the brutal nature of life at sea. The privateer's job was to raid and capture enemy ships, taking them as prizes for personal profit, with a commission granted by a nation's government. But when the war ended, thousands of privateers were left without a means of livelihood. For many, including Teach, piracy became a natural continuation of the skills they had honed during the war. By 1716, Teach had joined forces with Benjamin Hornigold, a notorious pirate captain who had his own fleet operating out of New Providence in the Bahamas, a pirate haven that became the epicenter of the growing pirate empire in the Caribbean. Under Hornigold's mentorship, Teach learned the intricacies of pirate life, from organizing attacks to managing a crew. Hornigold himself was a master tactician, preferring to avoid unnecessary violence and instead relying on his ship's imposing presence to encourage surrender. Teach absorbed these lessons well, developing his own methods of psychological warfare that would later define his legacy. In November 1717, Blackbeard's ascent to pirate fame reached a turning point when he captured La Concorde, a large French slave ship. This capture marked the beginning of his reign as one of the most formidable pirates of the time. He converted La Concorde into his flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge, and equipped it with 40 guns. Now with a powerful ship under his command, Blackbeard and his crew embarked on a series of devastating raids across the Caribbean and the American colonies. But Blackbeard was not merely a pirate in the traditional sense. He was a master of theatricality. His towering height and menacing appearance were only part of the performance. He carefully crafted his image, braiding his long, black beard and tying it with colorful ribbons. His most famous intimidation tactic was the use of slow-burning fuses, which he would light and tuck under his hat during battles, creating the illusion of a demonic figure engulfed in smoke. This combination of physical intimidation and psychological manipulation often led to quick surrenders from his enemies, reducing the need for actual combat. While Blackbeard's reputation for cruelty spread far and wide, it's important to note that his fearsome persona was often more effective than actual violence. Many historical accounts suggest that Blackbeard was more interested in acquiring wealth than shedding blood. His tactic of intimidation over force was not only pragmatic, but also strategic. A pirate's success relied heavily on maintaining a crew's loyalty, and excessive violence could lead to dissent among even the most hardened men. By limiting unnecessary bloodshed, Blackbeard kept his crew intact and eager to follow him. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Blackbeard's career is his interaction with colonial governments, particularly the governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden. Blackbeard was a pirate, but he was also a man of strategy, navigating the complexities of power in the Americas. By mid-1718, Blackbeard had grown so powerful that he was able to negotiate with colonial officials, receiving a royal pardon from Governor Eden. In exchange, Blackbeard ostensibly retired from piracy, taking up residence in Bath, North Carolina, and seemingly turning away from his life of plunder. This phase of Blackbeard's life is shrouded in mystery. While records suggest that he accepted the pardon and briefly tried to live a quieter life, it didn't take long for him to return to piracy. Some historians believe that Blackbeard never intended his criminal enterprise and that the pardon was merely a way to buy time and solidify his base of operations in North Carolina. His relationship with Governor Eden was likely more transactional than moral, as Blackbeard's activities continued under the radar, with the governor possibly turning a blind eye in exchange for a share of the profits. One of the most notorious incidents during this period was Blackbeard's blockade of Charleston, South Carolina, in May 1718. For nearly a week, Blackbeard held the city hostage, capturing ships and demanding a ransom, not of gold or jewels, but of medicine. This curious demand has been the subject of much speculation, with some historians suggesting that Blackbeard or members of his crew were suffering from illness, possibly syphilis, a common affliction among sailors of the time. The blockade ended only when the citizens of Charleston delivered the requested medicine, further cementing Blackbeard's reputation as a pirate who could bring entire cities to their knees. Despite his success, Blackbeard's reign of terror could not last forever. His return to piracy after accepting the pardon did not go unnoticed by the authorities. By late 1718, the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, had had enough of Blackbeard's continued depredations along the American coast. Fearful that Blackbeard's activities would destabilize the colony and encourage further lawlessness, Spotswood took the unprecedented step of commissioning an attack on Blackbeard, despite the fact that the pirate was technically outside of his jurisdiction. This set the stage for Blackbeard's final confrontation. In November 1718, Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the British Royal Navy was dispatched to track down Blackbeard and bring an end to his reign. Maynard's pursuit led him to Ocracoke Island, a remote hideout where Blackbeard had been operating. What followed was a fierce and bloody battle, one that has since become the stuff of legend. Blackbeard's ship, the Adventure, was outnumbered and outgunned by Maynard's forces, but the pirate fought with the ferocity for which he had become famous. Despite sustaining multiple gunshot wounds and slashes from swords, Blackbeard refused to go down easily. The hand-to-hand combat aboard Maynard's ship was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. In the end, it was Maynard who emerged victorious, but only after personally engaging Blackbeard in combat and delivering the final blows that ended the pirate's life. Blackbeard's death marked the end of an era, but his legend was only beginning. His severed head was hung from the bow of Maynard's ship as a grim warning to other pirates, and his body was thrown into the sea. Even in death, Blackbeard's fearsome reputation lived on, with stories of his ghost haunting the waters of Ocracoke and his buried treasure still enticing treasure hunters to this day. As we move further into the details of his life, the myth and reality of Blackbeard often intertwine, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. However, one thing remains clear. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was a master of both piracy and self-promotion, a figure who looms large in both historical accounts and popular imagination. The aftermath of Blackbeard's death was as tumultuous as his life. His brutal demise sent shockwaves through the colonies, with many pirates either fleeing the Atlantic or seeking pardons to avoid a similar fate. The death of such a notorious figure, however, did little to extinguish the spirit of piracy, which remained alive for years after his execution. Nonetheless, Blackbeard's reign of terror came to symbolize the beginning of the end for the golden age of piracy. The legend of Blackbeard, bolstered by sensational accounts of his life, grew with each retelling. The image of a towering, smoke-wreathed figure, brandishing a cutlass and commanding fear on the high seas, became immortalized in literature, folklore, and eventually popular culture. His fearsome reputation was largely a product of his theatrical methods, ensuring that stories of his exploits would far outlast his time in power. One of the most compelling aspects of Blackbeard's legacy is the way in which his legend overshadowed the actual details of his life. His notorious image as a ruthless and bloodthirsty pirate belied a cunning strategist who preferred to use fear as a tool rather than violence. In fact, many historians agree that Blackbeard's ability to intimidate his victims without resorting to bloodshed was one of his greatest strengths. His theatricality was designed to create an aura of invincibility, giving him a psychological advantage over his enemies. This reputation for brutality, however, was often exaggerated by contemporary accounts. Blackbeard's actions, while certainly criminal, were no more ruthless than those of other pirates, or even privateers of his time. In fact, compared to figures like Charles Vane or Black Bart Roberts, who were known for their viciousness, Blackbeard was relatively restrained in his use of violence. Nevertheless, it was his ability to manipulate his image that made him such a feared figure in the eyes of his enemies. In terms of leadership, Blackbeard's success was also rooted in his ability to maintain loyalty among his crew. Life aboard a pirate ship was brutal and dangerous, with mutiny and dissent constant threats to a captain's authority. Yet, by cultivating an image of invincibility and sharing the spoils of his conquests fairly, Blackbeard was able to command the loyalty of some of the most feared men of the time. His ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, became a symbol of power, and those who sailed under his flag knew that they were part of something larger than just piracy. They were part of the legend. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Blackbeard's career is his relationship with the colonial governments of the time. Blackbeard's interactions with figures like Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina reveal a complex dynamic in which pirates and colonial authorities often found themselves in uneasy alliances. Some historians believe that Blackbeard may have had a deal with Eden, wherein the pirate would provide a share of his plunder in exchange for the governor's protection. This relationship reflects the blurred lines between legality and criminality during this period, as colonial officials were often willing to turn a blind eye to piracy if it served their economic interests. Blackbeard's dealings with Governor Eden culminated in the issuance of a royal pardon, which theoretically allowed the pirate to retire from his life of crime. However, like many other pirates of the era, Blackbeard found it difficult to leave piracy behind. Whether it was greed, the lure of adventure, or simply the lack of alternative opportunities, he soon returned to the seas. His brief retirement in Bath, North Carolina, has been the subject of much speculation. Some accounts suggest that Blackbeard genuinely tried to go straight, while others argue that he continued his pirate activities in secret. Using his connections with Eden, to avoid prosecution. As his criminal activities resumed, Blackbeard's enemies began to close in. His blockade of Charleston, South Carolina in 1718 was one of the most brazen acts of piracy in American history. For nearly a week, Blackbeard terrorized the city, capturing ships and holding hostages for ransom. The fact that his demand was for medical supplies rather than treasure has led to much speculation. Some historians believe that Blackbeard's crew was suffering from illnesses like syphilis or scurvy, which were common afflictions among sailors of the time. Others suggest that this was another example of Blackbeard's pragmatic approach to piracy, securing resources that were vital to his crew's survival. The blockade of Charleston was a turning point in Blackbeard's career, as it drew the ire of colonial authorities who were determined to bring him to justice. Virginia's Governor Alexander Spotswood, in particular, saw Blackbeard as a threat to the stability of the colonies. In an audacious move, Spotswood authorized a military expedition to hunt down the pirate, despite the fact that Blackbeard was technically outside of his jurisdiction. This decision would set the stage for Blackbeard's final battle. The hunt for Blackbeard culminated in his infamous encounter with Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the British Royal Navy. Maynard's mission was clear: capture or kill Blackbeard at all costs. The ensuing battle off the coast of Ocracoke Island was a brutal affair, with Maynard's forces ultimately overpowering the pirates' crew. Blackbeard, true to his fearsome reputation, fought to the bitter end, reportedly sustaining 5 gunshot wounds and more than 20 sword cuts before succumbing to his injuries. His death marked the end of an era, but his legend was only beginning. Blackbeard's severed head, displayed as a warning to other pirates, became a powerful symbol of the colonial authorities' determination to stamp out piracy. Yet, even in death, Blackbeard's story continued to captivate the imagination of those who heard it. His buried treasure, rumored to be hidden along the coast of North Carolina, has never been found, adding an element of mystery to his already larger-than-life persona. Over the centuries, Blackbeard's legend has only grown, with each retelling adding new layers of intrigue and myth to his story. He has been portrayed as everything from a ruthless killer to a clever tactician, from a rebel against authority to a symbol of lawlessness. In many ways, Blackbeard's legacy is a reflection of the time in which he lived, a world where the line between hero and villain was often blurred, and where survival often depended on one's ability to adapt, to intimidate, and to endure. As we look back on the life and legend of Edward Teach, we are left with a complex and fascinating figure who defies simple categorization. Was he a brutal pirate who terrorized the seas, or a cunning strategist who understood the power of image and reputation? Was he a villain to be feared, or a man simply trying to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world? The answer perhaps lies somewhere in between, in the gray areas where history and legend meet. When we delve deeper into the true nature of Blackbeard, what emerges is not just a story of piracy, but a story of survival, leadership, and the power of myth. His ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Atlantic, both literally and figuratively, made him one of the most successful pirates of his time. And while his life may have ended in violence, his legend continues to live on, a testament to the enduring power of one man's ability to shape his own destiny and the world's perception of him. Blackbeard's legend became a significant part of pirate folklore, not only because of his dramatic death, but also due to his ability to create a persona that invoked fear. Even now, many are fascinated by the duality of his life. A brutal pirate on one hand, yet a man who preferred negotiation over unnecessary bloodshed. His reign on the seas was as much about psychological warfare as it was about plunder, with many of his victims surrendering out of sheer terror before any violence could occur. This level of control was rare among pirates of his time, as most preferred brute force to achieve their aims. One story that epitomizes Blackbeard's mastery over his terrifying image is his encounter with the ship Margaret. After capturing the vessel, Blackbeard held its crew captive, but chose not to kill them. Instead, he struck a deal with the ship's captain, Henry Bostock, to release them unharmed after they provided information about local shipping routes. Blackbeard let them go, creating a sense of relief among his captives, but he also allowed them to spread the word about his terrifying appearance and the ease with which he had overtaken their ship. The legend grew not through brutality, but by seeding fear. Another account describes how Blackbeard and his crew once deliberately marooned a group of sailors after taking their ship. Rather than killing them, Blackbeard left them on a deserted island with minimal supplies. Their eventual rescue reinforced Blackbeard's merciless reputation, yet it also suggested he was not entirely heartless. These acts served dual purposes. They ensured Blackbeard's legend lived on and reinforced his reputation without wasting resources or shedding unnecessary blood. His tactics of letting survivors live to tell their tale were key to solidifying the myth of his terror on the high seas. The fear surrounding Blackbeard extended even to the authorities charged with hunting him. Colonial governors and their representatives, though backed by official power, were often reluctant to take him on directly. His cunning and ability to disappear into coastal hideaways made him a constant menace. However, once he became a target of British authorities after his blockade of Charleston, his days were numbered. Blackbeard's legendary career came to its infamous conclusion at Ocracoke Inlet, a place that would forever be tied to his name. The battle between Blackbeard's crew and the forces led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard was brutal. Blackbeard's last stand became the stuff of legend. He reportedly fought with unmatched ferocity, continuing to battle even after sustaining severe injuries. The details of the battle, in which he received multiple gunshots and stab wounds before finally falling, have become a key part of his legend. Maynard's decision to decapitate Blackbeard and display his severed head was a macabre message intended to stamp out piracy once and for all. Yet, rather than quelling interest in piracy, Blackbeard's dramatic demise only fueled the fascination surrounding him. The image of his head hanging from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship became a grim reminder of the colonial force's determination, but also a symbol of Blackbeard's power and infamy. His death, instead of ending his story, immortalized him in the public imagination. Over the years, many have searched for Blackbeard's buried treasure, with rumors of hidden riches adding to the intrigue that surrounds his legacy. While no one has ever definitively found his loot, the mystery of where, or if it exists, continues to draw treasure hunters to the shores of North Carolina and other places he was known to frequent. This enduring mystery is a testament to how Blackbeard's legend has transcended history, becoming as much about myth and speculation as it is about historical fact. In the years following his death, Blackbeard's story was woven into pirate mythology. He became a fixture in books, plays, and eventually films, where his persona was often exaggerated to fantastical proportions. But even as creative liberties were taken, the essence of Blackbeard remained. A man who understood the value of fear and reputation, who ruled his crew with cunning, and whose legacy as a fearsome pirate captain became one of the most enduring stories from the golden age of piracy. Today, historians and enthusiasts alike continue to study the life of Edward Teach, attempting to separate fact from fiction. But perhaps what makes Blackbeard so compelling is the very ambiguity that surrounds him. In many ways, his legend is as untouchable as his treasure, constantly shifting, open to interpretation, and forever enticing those who seek to uncover the truth behind the myth. Blackbeard's legacy lives on, not just through historical accounts but through the collective imagination, where his name has become synonymous with the golden age of piracy. His exploits, both real and exaggerated, serve as a reminder of a time when the seas were wild, and men like Blackbeard ruled them with a combination of terror, charisma, and cunning strategy. Though he met a violent end, the legend of Blackbeard endures, cementing his place as one of the most feared, enigmatic, and enduring figures in pirate history. Despite his violent death, Blackbeard's influence on piracy and seafaring culture has lingered for centuries. This story is often cited as one of the most well-known and well-preserved legends from the golden age of piracy, a period that lasted from the late 17th century into the early 18th century. Blackbeard's larger-than-life persona, meticulously crafted both during his life and after his death, became a template for how pirates were imagined in the public consciousness. Interestingly, the real Edward Teach was likely a far more complex character than the one depicted in popular culture. Historians debate the extent to which Blackbeard's actions were calculated to cultivate his fearsome image. His braided beard, often lit with slow-burning fuses, was as much an act of psychological warfare as it was a personal eccentricity. His ability to invoke terror without excessive violence was a sign of his understanding that fear, more than force, could be a potent weapon. His story teaches us that sometimes perception can be even more powerful than reality. One of the intriguing aspects of Blackbeard's legacy is the way it serves as a mirror to the social and political context of the early 18th century. Piracy was, at its core, a response to the economic inequalities and harsh conditions of maritime life during this time. Many pirates, including Blackbeard, started their careers as privateers, sailors who were legally sanctioned to attack enemy ships during wartime. However, when peace came, these men found themselves out of work, and many turned to piracy as a means of survival. Blackbeard's rise to power was part of this broader pattern, reflecting the desperation and lawlessness that characterized life on the seas during this period. Blackbeard's career also highlights the ambiguous relationships between pirates and colonial governments. His suspected ties to Governor Eden of North Carolina suggest that piracy was not always viewed in strictly black and white terms. For some colonial leaders, pirates represented both a threat and an opportunity. Dangerous outlaws who could also provide valuable goods or protection in exchange for leniency. This dynamic adds a layer of complexity to Blackbeard's story, as it reveals how the boundaries between legality and criminality were often blurred during this time. Additionally, Blackbeard's story provides a fascinating glimpse into the social dynamics aboard pirate ships. Unlike the strict hierarchies found in naval or merchant vessels, pirate crews often operated under more democratic principles. Captains like Blackbeard were elected by their crews, and important decisions, such as whether to engage in battle or where to sail, were often made collectively. This democratic structure, which allowed pirates to challenge the authority of traditional naval powers, made pirate life both appealing and dangerous. It also gave Blackbeard the opportunity to rise through the ranks and command loyalty from his crew through his charismatic leadership and strategic thinking. Blackbeard's ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, was central to his reign of terror. Originally a French slave ship, Blackbeard captured it and transformed it into one of the most formidable pirate vessels of its time. Armed with 40 guns, Queen Anne's Revenge became synonymous with Blackbeard's power, and it was this ship that enabled him to blockade Charleston, South Carolina, a bold and unprecedented move that cemented his place in pirate history. The capture and refitting of such a large vessel was a testament to Blackbeard's tactical acumen, allowing him to command both respect and fear across the Atlantic. The mystery surrounding Blackbeard's supposed hidden treasure has further fueled his legendary status. Despite extensive searches, no definitive trove of Blackbeard's loot has ever been found, leaving room for speculation and the possibility that his riches remain buried somewhere along the coastlines he once terrorized. The treasure myth adds an additional layer of intrigue to Blackbeard's story, drawing in treasure hunters, historians, and enthusiasts alike, all captivated by the idea that the pirate's fortune may still be waiting to be discovered. Beyond the specifics of his life, Blackbeard's enduring appeal lies in the way his story taps into universal themes of rebellion, freedom, and adventure. In many ways, Blackbeard represents a rejection of authority, a man who carved out his own path in a world that offered few opportunities for social mobility. His defiance of colonial powers and his ability to amass wealth and power on his own terms made him a folk hero to some, even as he was a villain to others. His story resonates with the idea of the pirate as an outsider, a figure who lives by their own rules and challenges the established order. This idea of the pirate as both hero and villain is reflected in the way Blackbeard has been depicted in popular culture. From Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to modern pirate films, the character of the fearsome yet charismatic pirate captain owes much to Blackbeard's legend. He has become the archetype for what we imagine when we think of pirates, a ruthless, cunning leader with a penchant for dramatic flair. Yet, beneath this larger-than-life persona, Blackbeard was a man navigating the dangerous waters of a world in flux, balancing the demands of his crew with the ever-present threat of capture or death. As we conclude our exploration of Blackbeard's life and legend, it becomes clear that his legacy is not just about piracy, but about the power of myth-making. Blackbeard's ability to manipulate his image, both during his life and after his death, has ensured that his story remains a part of our collective imagination. Whether we see him as a villain, a hero, or something in between, Blackbeard's place in history is secure, not just as a notorious pirate, but as a symbol of rebellion, adventure, and the enduring allure of the open seas.